My name is Brent Algren. I'm in St. John's, Newfoundland, in a spare room that smells of salt air and old electrical tape, talking into a cheap microphone I normally use to test headset cables on the ferry. If you're hearing this, it means you're still getting something through. Maybe you're sitting in a kitchen with the lights off. Maybe you're in a truck on the side of a road with your phone on low power mode. Maybe you're in a place where people keep saying stay calm, and you want one voice that sounds like a person. I can give you that. I'm not trained for this. I'm not a reporter. I'm not military. I'm a ferry electrician who fixes busted door interlocks and chases weird shorts through damp conduits. I'm also the guy who spends weekends listening to high-frequency traffic, recording broadcasts, and saving anything that sounds off. I've got a battered laptop with stickers peeling off, a receiver that looks older than it is, and a long wire strung out to a fiberglass pole that I keep telling my landlord is for hobby science. He doesn't care. He wants rent on time, and he wants me to stop dripping seawater down the hallway. I used to dump little clips on a tiny blog. Nobody big reads it. A couple of retirees. A kid in Reykjavik who is way too smart for his age. A guy in Maine who works nights and listens because it helps him stay awake. That was the audience. 10 people on a good day. That was the whole point. Quiet, harmless. Then Greenland went from tensions to something else, and I watched the switch happen through sound first, before the headlines got brave, before the officials stopped smiling, before anybody admitted anybody was shooting. I want to be careful with dates because people twist dates to make you doubt your own memory. This started for me on a Friday night, late winter, the kind of night where the wind keeps nudging the siding, and you can hear it in your teeth. I'd just gotten off the ferry run. My hands smelled of diesel and that burnt rubber smell you get after replacing a belt. I ate leftover fries cold from the box, and I turned the receiver on because that's what I do when my brain won't shut off. The first thing I caught was a local Greenland bulletin, in Greenlandic, the kind of thing that usually sounds calm and routine even when it's weather warnings. I don't speak Greenlandic. I recognize the rhythm. I recognize place names when a voice repeats them. I was half listening, half scrolling a parts catalog when the bulletin cut off mid-sentence. Not a fade, not a clean end, just gone. Right after that, I got a clean advisory in English. Not a normal station introduction. No, this is anything. No call sign. No, for information. It was crisp, flat. The voice did not sound nervous. It repeated the same short paragraph twice, word for word, with the same tiny breath in the same place. It said there was an incident in Greenland, that people should avoid restricted areas, that local authorities and allied forces were responding, and that rumors were a threat. I sat up because that kind of repetition is not human habit. That's a script being played. You can hear it. Most people don't notice, but I notice. I spend my workdays listening to motors and fans and relays, and I can tell when something that should vary is stuck on a loop. Then, and this is the part I still replay, because it makes my stomach tighten, an American Press Pool feed came up in the same band. It sounded live. You could hear chairs, papers, someone whispering off mic. A man cleared his throat and started talking about protecting American personnel and ensuring continuity of strategic capabilities. He used Greenland in his sentences the way you say a place you already control. Within minutes, another voice cut in, sharper, pushing back, saying the Kingdom of Denmark had not authorized any unilateral action, saying the North Atlantic Treaty Organization had processes, saying the situation was being managed. They argued without raising their voices, which somehow made it worse. You could hear both sides trying to keep the words smooth while the meaning got violent underneath. I wasn't hearing theory. I was hearing two official realities being built in real time, side by side, over the same air. I did what I always do. I started saving everything. I stamped my recordings with time from my laptop clock, and time from a cheap backup clock I keep set to coordinated universal time because my old habit is to double-check myself. I wrote notes in plain language. Greenland local cutoff. Advisory looped twice. Press feed arguing. On Saturday morning, I woke up and the normal world was still there. Coffee shop open. People complaining about potholes. A hockey game on the television above the bar with the sound turned low. The news had a bland segment about Arctic disputes and resource competition. They showed ice, a smiling diplomat, and a map with no detail. I wanted to believe I'd caught some weird rehearsal or a glitch. That would have been tidy. That would have let me go back to fixing ferry lighting and cursing at corroded terminals. But Saturday night, the sound got worse, not louder. Worse in a way that tells you people are moving pieces, not talking. Here's what I mean by that in plain words. Diplomacy has a sound. It is full of pauses that try to look thoughtful. It is full of sentences built to avoid responsibility. Logistics has a different sound. Logistics is call signs repeating, cargo references, weather updates that matter too much, short acknowledgments, people asking for clearance and getting delayed answers. I started hearing the same cargo flight identifiers over and over. I'm not going to say the identifiers on this recording. I'm not here to help anybody track anything. I'll describe patterns. That's it. I heard a set of cargo flights checking in, getting routed north, then the same set checking in again hours later, then silence where their next step should have been. I heard a Danish coastal patrol calling for clearance in waters that on paper belong under Danish and Greenlandic control. The voice sounded tired and annoyed, the way somebody sounds when he has done the same job 1,000 times and suddenly the rules change without warning. He kept asking. He kept getting nothing. Then I picked up a base weather feed. Not a civilian forecast, a clipped, numbers-only style that's meant for pilots and operations. It went silent for a while, then came back with values that did not match the region. You can fake a lot of things, but you can't fake weather forever. Weather is stubborn. I cross-checked with the public forecasts and with what I could hear from ships and civilian aviation still talking. The numbers did not line up. That is not an accident. That is a sign of somebody trying to mask a location or mask conditions. On Sunday afternoon, I posted a short thread on my blog. Nothing dramatic. I said I was hearing conflicting official traffic related to Greenland. I said there were loops that sounded pre-recorded. I said logistics chatter was rising. I attached a short clip with the clean advisory voice, but I clipped out anything that could help identify the source beyond what a regular person already knew from news. Within an hour, my blog traffic spiked in a way it never had. It was not a bunch of curious locals. It was a flood of hits that moved too fast, from places that didn't fit my usual pattern. I watched it happen in the little free analytics panel and my throat went dry. That night, I got an email from an address that looked ordinary, but the message was written by someone who understood exactly what I did and how I did it. No greeting, no fluff. Just a list of things to monitor, laid out clean, with notes about when certain paths tend to open in the ionosphere at high latitudes, with a suggestion to keep an ear on polar routes at night because the noise floor drops. The email ended with one sentence that made me stare at my ceiling for a long time. It said, "Save everything, but stop posting timestamps." I'm not a paranoid guy by nature, I'm a practical guy. If a breaker trips, I check load. If a motor whines, I check bearings. I don't invent demons. Still, I sat there thinking, who knows I'm doing this? Who thinks my little hobby blog matters? Who is confident enough to tell me what to do? Monday came. I went to work. The ferry terminal smelled the same. The crew joked the same. Somebody complained about the coffee machine. The world tried to act normal. Then the first real change hit my town, soft and quiet. Coast Guard fuel got rationed. You could see it in how the vehicles moved. Fewer runs, more idling with engines off. A buddy of mine, Aidan McIsaac, who used to do contract work on marine electrical, texted me a short message. Something's up at the base. Don't go out there. There isn't one single base that runs Newfoundland's whole life. But there are facilities, there are agreements, there are places where you can feel the government's hand. When those places change their posture, the rest of us feel it through small inconveniences first. Port access tightened. New fences went up in spots that had been open. A security guy I'd never seen before told me I couldn't walk through a gate I'd walked through for years. He didn't yell. He didn't explain. He just stood there with a clipboard and a face that said he had been told to stand there. Then the ferry schedule changed. Not canceled, not officially. It became pending security. That phrase showed up on the terminal board and everybody laughed at it because it sounded so dramatic. People made jokes. People always make jokes when something scares them. I stopped laughing when I heard the way the dispatch office started talking. More codes, more private calls, less radio chatter. The people who coordinate movement were suddenly careful with words. That is always a sign. That night, back at home, I listened again and I heard something I had never heard before in my life from this part of the world. A calm, formal message that sounded allied, telling units to hold fire unless fired upon, followed minutes later by a different calm, formal message that sounded American, telling units to secure the perimeter by any necessary means. Those two ideas cannot share a battlefield for long. One creates hesitation. One punishes hesitation. I sat at my desk, and I did a thing I hadn't done since trade school. I drew a map on paper, not for art, for focus. I wrote Greenland at the top. I wrote Iceland to the southeast. I wrote Newfoundland down here where I am. I drew the rough shape of the Davis Strait, Baffin Bay, the North Atlantic. I marked the places I knew mattered for air and sea lanes, and I did it from memory because I'm not a genius. I just pay attention. Greenland matters because it sits in the path of everything that wants to move across the top of the world. Aircraft routes, satellites, undersea cables, radar coverage. The cold truth is that it is a giant piece of geography with very few people on it, which makes powerful countries speak about it in the same tone they use for equipment. The United States has been on Greenland for a long time. That is not opinion. That is history. There was an agreement with Denmark in the early Cold War era. There was the big air base in the Northwest, built for strategic warning and Arctic operations. The name changed recently, but the function stayed. There was a terrible accident in the late 1960s when an American bomber crashed near the base, carrying nuclear weapons. People got sick cleaning it up. That became part of Greenland's memory, even when outsiders tried to move on. Greenland got more self-rule over time. Greenlandic politics changed. Denmark stayed involved. Everybody kept doing the dance where Greenland was autonomous, until something strategic came up, then the big powers leaned in. When the recent years brought more talk about rare earth minerals and melting sea ice and new shipping routes, it got louder. You could hear it in conferences, in policy papers, in smug interviews. That is the polite surface. Under the surface, there is always the question. Who controls access? Who controls the base? Who controls the sky? What I heard over the air that week was that the polite surface had cracked. On Tuesday, a civilian ship in the region called for assistance after fast movers passed close overhead. The voice on the ship was shaky. Not screaming, just shaky. He described lights, noise, then radio silence from a patrol he expected to respond. He asked if anyone could confirm a safe corridor. Nobody answered him for a long time. The ocean doesn't care about your politics. When ships stop getting clear guidance, people die even without bullets. They hit ice. They lose power. They run out of fuel. They make a decision that feels reasonable and it becomes a trap. That night I got another email from the same anonymous source. This one was shorter. It said, "You are being watched, not for arrest, for use." I read that sentence 10 times. For use. That's what you do with a wrench. That's what you do with a ferry schedule. That's what you do with a person when you don't care about him as a person. I thought about shutting everything down. Pull the wire. Turn off the receiver. Go back to normal life. Then I thought about what normal life means once governments start arguing over reality itself. Once you can hear two versions of the same incident, both spoken with confidence, and both cannot be true at the same time. So I did what I always do when I'm scared. I got methodical. I set my recording software to file by day and hour. I kept a notebook with pen because computers crash and batteries die. I checked my power strips. I cleaned corrosion off the antenna connection. I made tea and didn't drink it because my mouth was too dry. I also made a rule for myself. I would not post anything that could help somebody aim a weapon or intercept a convoy. I would post only broad patterns that might help ordinary people understand what was happening, and I would focus on safety and verification, not on spectacle. That rule lasted 3 days before I realized the problem. Even broad patterns can be weaponized. If you say, "This kind of traffic is rising at night," somebody with resources can narrow it down. If you say, "This corridor seems active," you may be describing a path that civilians might try to use, which could put them right in the middle of a fight. I learned that the hard way when a clip I posted, a harmless clip in my mind, got reposted by accounts that clearly wanted to prove a point. They added their own captions. They made claims I did not make. They pointed fingers. They used my audio as a club. I pulled the clip down. Too late. Once something is out, it is out. That is a simple rule of the modern world, and it only gets harsher during crisis. Thursday morning, I got off shift, and I walked home through a wet slush. I passed a grocery store where the shelves looked normal, but people were buying in a different way. More canned food, more water jugs, more batteries. Nobody said war. Nobody said Greenland. They just moved a bit faster and kept their eyes down. In my building lobby, my neighbor, Mags Kearney, stopped me and asked if I knew why the ferry schedule was changing again. Mags is older, sharp, the sort of woman who can look at a man's posture and tell if he's lying. She runs a small daycare out of her unit and keeps the place clean enough to eat off the floor. I told her I didn't know. That was true in the way that matters. I didn't know the specific reason. I just knew the pattern behind it, and I didn't want to be the guy who infects his neighbors with fear. I went upstairs, sat down, and listened. That afternoon, the air changed again. The voices got tighter, shorter. More, say again, more confirm. More indications of jamming or interference. High-latitude radio is always messy. The aurora messes with you. Solar activity messes with you. You can have a channel that sounds perfect for a minute, and then it turns to hiss. People who don't live with that think all radio is clean or all radio is noise. It is neither. It breathes. What I was hearing was not normal breathing. It was disruption on purpose. Signals stepping on each other. Short bursts that sounded engineered, not accidental. Someone was trying to drown out certain traffic while leaving other lanes open. You don't do that unless you expect conflict. That night I heard the first direct reference to shots fired. Not in a news broadcast. In a clipped, angry exchange between units. A voice with a North American accent said a patrol boat had been engaged near Greenland's west coast. A voice with a Scandinavian accent demanded clarification and used the word friendly. The reply came back after a pause. Friendly is unclear. That sentence is the moment I stopped thinking of this as an accident that could be walked back. I turned my laptop screen brightness down and I stared at the waveform display of the audio I'd recorded. You can see things in waveforms that you miss by ear, especially when your brain is tired. You can see identical loops, you can see edits, you can see where a live feed has been chopped and repackaged. I took one of the clean advisories, the one that repeated, and I lined the two repeats up on the screen. The peaks matched almost perfectly. That means it was not a person reading it twice. It was the same recording played twice. I checked other live segments and started catching the same trick. A room tone repeated. A chair squeak repeated. A breath repeated. Someone was recycling live content to create the feeling of continuity. That is a manipulation trick used in smaller ways during normal propaganda. Hearing it applied to a war-scale event is something else. It makes you feel stupid for trusting anything. On Friday, the week turned. In the morning, the Canadian government held a press conference. They used careful words about monitoring the situation, protecting sovereignty, ensuring maritime safety. No mention of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization's internal fracture. No mention of American forces being in direct confrontation with Allied assets. Just careful language. In the afternoon, my work called and told the crew to be ready for schedule disruptions and possible escort procedures. Escort procedures for a civilian ferry. That tells you everything without saying anything. That evening, I got the message that changed the tone from abstract to personal. It came through my blog's contact form. Not an email, the contact form that almost nobody uses because almost nobody knows my blog exists. The message was in English, written by someone who clearly spoke Greenlandic first. Short sentences, direct, no drama. The name signed at the bottom was Ivalu, no last name. The location line said Nuuk. Ivalu said she was a teacher. She said her brother lived in a small village north of Nuuk. She said the power had been on and off for days, and then it went off fully and cell service got weird, and the local radio cut out mid-bulletin. She said rumors were running wild, and she did not want rumors. She wanted one thing: confirmation that her brother's village still had power or still had any kind of broadcast. I stared at the message for a long time because it hit me in a way no official argument had. The people who pay the price first are never the men arguing in clean rooms. It is the teacher trying to keep kids calm while the lights flicker. It is the brother up the coast who cannot charge his phone. It is the old man with oxygen equipment wondering if the generator will hold. I wrote back to Ivalu. I kept it simple. I told her I could not guarantee anything. I told her I was listening from Newfoundland and that radio paths change. I told her I would listen for her village name and for any local utility or municipal traffic that might indicate power status. I asked her carefully what the village was called and if there was a local station name she trusted. Then I deleted that question before I sent it, because I realized what I was doing. I was asking a civilian to give me targeting information. I rewrote the message. I asked only for the village name, nothing else. That felt fair. Village names are not secrets. Then I sat there thinking about the rule I'd made for myself, the one about not helping anyone aim. Even village names can be used by a cruel person with resources. I sent the message anyway because the alternative was to do nothing, and doing nothing felt worse. That night I listened with a different kind of focus. Not for drama, For a teacher's brother. I started catching scraps, a municipal voice in Greenlandic that sounded strained, a brief mention of load shedding, a reference to a diesel shipment delayed, a call for medical supplies that got cut off. I caught a short exchange that sounded Danish, talking about protecting civil infrastructure. I caught another exchange, American accented, talking about securing critical nodes. Different words, same targets. The next day, Saturday, the first physical sign of the war reached my street in a way people could not ignore. It wasn't bombs. It wasn't soldiers marching. It was an odd convoy of unmarked vehicles moving toward the port, escorted by police who looked tense and annoyed, and a rumor that certain areas were off limits by federal request. You can tell when police are doing normal work. You can also tell when police are being told to do something that makes no sense to them, something tied to bigger politics. Their body language changes. They stop chatting. They start scanning faces. Mags knocked on my door that afternoon. She had a bag of oranges and she looked angry. She said her cousin's husband worked at the terminal and said there were Americans asking questions about fuel storage. She asked me if we were going to get dragged into this. I told her the truth. The only truth I could stand behind. I told her I didn't know what would happen, but I said that when powerful countries fight over the North Atlantic, Newfoundland always gets brushed by it. We sit in the path of routes. We sit in the shadow of agreements. We are the place that gets used and then told it was temporary. Mags asked me how I knew any of that, and I lied by omission. I said I pay attention. After she left, I turned my receiver on and I heard something that made my hands go cold. A distress call, not a matey that repeats clean, a messy human one. A civilian voice, cracking, saying a small aircraft had been forced to divert, saying there were lights over the water, saying he could not get a response from the usual air traffic channel, saying he was low on fuel. He said he had passengers. He said he had a medical case on board. Then an authoritative voice cut in, calm, ordering him to maintain heading and altitude and to stand by. It did not sound like civilian air traffic control. It sounded like a military controller who had no time for feelings. The civilian voice tried to argue. He sounded close to tears. He said he needed a landing plan. He said he could not stand by forever. The authoritative voice repeated the instruction, same tone, and then the channel filled with noise. The kind of noise that doesn't belong naturally. Someone pushed a wall of static on purpose. I sat there and realized I was listening to a person being turned into a problem to be managed. I don't know if that aircraft landed safely. I don't know if those passengers lived. I know I never heard him again. That's the moment I stopped thinking of my recordings as a hobby archive and started thinking of them as a witness record. Not heroic, just witness. Sunday morning I got a response from Ivalu. She gave me the village name. It was a place I recognized from maps because I've stared at North Atlantic charts for fun. She told me her brother's name too, and I hated that she felt she needed to humanize him for me, but I understood why she did it. She wanted me to care. I did care. That was the problem. So I listened harder. I shifted my antenna orientation. I waited for night when the high-frequency paths tend to stretch farther. I checked for local Greenland traffic that might leak out through the chaos. I checked for any hint of diesel generator usage, because when towns lose grid power, people start talking about fuel the way people talk about blood. I caught a brief, scratchy transmission that mentioned the village by name. It was not a cheerful message. It sounded like a municipal worker reporting outages and asking for a resupply that was not coming. I heard the word for power more than once. I heard the word for school. I heard a person's voice crack. It wasn't the clean confirmation Ivalu wanted, but it meant one thing for sure. Somebody there still had a transmitter. Somebody there still had enough power to speak. I wrote back to Ivalu with careful wording. I said I had heard the village name spoken within the last 12 hours in a context that suggested local communications were still functioning at least intermittently. I told her I could not promise stability. I told her to conserve phone battery, to treat all clear messages with suspicion if they came too early, to trust local voices more than polished foreign ones. That last line, the one about polished foreign voices, is where I crossed a line. I know it. I can admit it. I stopped being just an observer and started being a guide. The same night, I got another anonymous email. This one did not contain monitoring tips. It contained a screenshot of my blog, with a circle drawn around a sentence I had written 2 days earlier about cargo patterns shifting north after midnight. The email had one sentence: delete this. I felt anger rise up. A hot, stupid anger. I'm a grown man, and I still get that feeling when somebody tries to order me around without context. Then I thought about the civilian aircraft voice getting drowned out. I thought about Avalu's brother. I thought about the word use. I deleted the post. Not because I wanted to obey, because I didn't want to be responsible for something I couldn't see. Right after I deleted it, my internet cut out for 3 minutes, then came back. That could be coincidence. Internet drops happen. Newfoundland weather does its thing. Still, I sat there looking at my router lights and I did not breathe right for a while. On Monday, the news finally said the quiet part out loud. They didn't call it a war. They called it a security incident and an allied dispute. They said there had been an exchange of fire near Greenland between American forces and other allied elements. They said civilian shipping was advised to avoid certain corridors. They said Canada was monitoring. The clip they played of an American official was clean and confident. The clip they played of a Danish official was controlled but strained. They cut away before the Danish official finished his sentence. That editing choice matters. It tells you what the broadcaster wants you to feel. That night, in my headphones, I heard something that did not need a news anchor to interpret. I heard a Danish voice, furious now, demanding to know why American aircraft were operating in an air corridor that had been closed by Greenlandic authorities. I heard an American voice respond that Greenlandic authorities were compromised and that continuity required action. When a country starts describing another country's local authorities as compromised, it is laying track for occupation. Not aid, not partnership, occupation. I'm going to say something blunt. People treat Greenland as empty. It is not empty. People live there. Families, teachers, mechanics, nurses, kids who play soccer in cold wind. When you fight over a place, you fight over those people too, even if you pretend you aren't. Tuesday, my work got stranger. Aiden, my buddy, told me a federal security guy had been asking about radio enthusiasts in the port area. Aiden said the guy did not smile. Aiden said the guy did not threaten, exactly. He just asked questions in a way that made Aiden feel small. I asked Aiden what name was on the badge. Aiden said he didn't remember. He said the guy moved past names and went straight to control. That afternoon, I saw 2 people I didn't recognize in the parking lot across from my building. They sat in a car for a long time. They didn't do anything dramatic. They just sat, then left, then came back later. That might have been nothing. It also might have been a reminder. I kept listening. I kept saving. I stopped posting publicly. I shifted to sending short, careful updates to a few people I trusted. The sort of updates that focus on verification and safety, not on who is winning. Winning is a word people say when they're far from the cost. Wednesday night, the sea chatter got crowded. A lot of voices, a lot of overlaps, and a lot of frustration. The tone you hear when too many ships are trying to reroute around the same danger and nobody is coordinating well. I caught snippets about an undersea cable issue. Somebody said a segment was down near Greenland. Somebody else said it was being restored. Then an official-sounding message said no disruption reported. Those 3 things cannot all be true at the same time. Here is the practical side of that for ordinary people. Undersea cables carry more than entertainment. They carry banking traffic, medical coordination, emergency communications backbones. When cables get cut or degraded, islands and remote coasts feel it first. You start getting delays. You start getting weird errors. You start getting systems that look online but behave wrong. Thursday morning, my bank app stalled on my phone. It came back after a minute. It might have been routine. It might have been early warning. Either way, it got my attention. That day, the ferry terminal got a new rule. Staff could not bring personal bags into certain areas. That is the kind of rule that always shows up when somebody worries about devices. Cameras, recorders, radios, people carrying information out. I looked at my backpack with my laptop inside and I felt my face heat up. Not guilt, just the awareness that the world had shifted and my normal gear was now suspicious. That night, I made the decision to start speaking instead of typing. Typing leaves traces that other people can copy and reframe. Audio does too, but audio carries tone, hesitation, the human texture that propaganda hates. Audio also reaches people who are tired, who can't stare at screens, who just need to hear another person. So I rigged this setup. No fancy studio, a cheap microphone, a basic transmitter chain I've used before for short tests, a car battery with a charger because I don't trust the grid to stay polite. I'm not giving you technical instructions. I'm telling you what I did so you understand the level of this. This is a guy in a rented room doing his best. If this cuts out, it cuts out. I'll come back when I can. Now I'm going to tell you what I heard last night, because last night was the first time I heard what sounded like the edge of a real engagement, not just posturing. I heard a set of short military timestamps spoken in the clear. 0215, 0220, 0228. Those were not civilian calls. Those were operational references. Someone was tracking an event minute by minute. I heard a mention of fast jets, specifically F-35, operating near a protected zone. I heard another voice refer to maritime patrol, which usually means those long aircraft that hunt submarines and watch sea lanes. I heard a third voice talk about a surface contact and a warning shot. Then, and this is the part I can't shake, I heard a calm voice announce that a friendly unit had taken damage and was requesting emergency assistance. The voice did not sound shocked. It sounded trained to treat damage as a checklist item. Somewhere out there, a crew was dealing with smoke, flooding, injuries, fear, and cold water that kills fast. Somebody's hands were shaking while he tried to work a pump or clamp a wound. The voice on the radio stayed calm because that is what training does. Calm voice does not mean calm reality. There was a pause. Then a different voice, Scandinavian accented, demanded to know why American units were in the zone at all. The American voice responded with a sentence that sounded rehearsed. Preventing hostile takeover of critical infrastructure. Hostile takeover. That is language that belongs in an invasion, not an allied dispute. People around me in St. John's are still going to work. Kids are still going to school. The bars are still open. That normal surface is going to keep existing until it can't. That is how collapse happens in real life. It is not a movie moment. It is a slow shift where the rules change and you realize too late that you needed different habits. My habit has been listening, saving. I want to tell you something practical, not dramatic. If you're in the North Atlantic region, if you're in Iceland, Greenland, Newfoundland, Labrador, the Maritimes, parts of coastal Norway, parts of the United Kingdom's far north, pay attention to your supply chains. If ferries get pending security, that means somebody is thinking of civilian movement as a variable in war planning. If fuel gets rationed, that means priorities are shifting. If port gates get guarded by faces you don't know, that means somebody new has authority. None of this means you should panic. Panic makes you stupid. It makes you loud. It makes you easy to herd. It means you should get boring and prepared. Charge devices when you can. Keep cash on hand if you can. Keep food that does not need cooking. Keep water. Keep warm clothes ready. Keep a way to light a room that does not rely on the ceiling. This is not end-of-the-world talk. This is storm readiness talk applied to a political storm. Now I'm going to circle back to Ivalu because her message is the reason I'm doing this out loud. I listened again today for her village. I heard nothing clear. That doesn't mean it's gone. It means the path might not be open. It means jamming might be heavier. It means the local transmitter might be out of fuel. It means 100 normal technical failures that feel huge when you're living inside them. I wrote Ivalu and told her I couldn't confirm anything today. I hated sending that. I felt useless. Then she wrote back and said, "Thank you for trying. You are more real than the television." That sentence messed me up for an hour, because it is simple, and it is true. The television is now full of perfect hair and perfect phrasing and cutaways that remove the parts that sound human. The air, when you can catch it, still carries the rough edges. That is why I'm here, not to tell you who to support, not to pretend I know strategies. I'm here to tell you what the air sounds like when alliances break. Tonight, before I started this transmission, I checked my files and noticed something that should scare anyone who cares about truth. 2 separate, official messages from 2 different sources used the same sentence structure and the same uncommon phrase in the same place, delivered with different voices. That is coordination. That is scripting across factions or infiltration across factions. Either option is bad. If you are listening and you still have access to news, don't trust a message just because it is calm. Don't trust a message just because it uses official-sounding words. Trust patterns. Trust local details. Trust imperfect human voices that acknowledge uncertainty. And do something else. If you repeat a rumor, label it as rumor. If you share a claim you cannot verify, say you cannot verify it. That one habit can save lives because it slows the spread of false certainty. And false certainty gets people killed. Now, I need to talk about something that is already happening here, quietly, and it matters. People are starting to treat information as contraband. At work, a supervisor pulled me aside and asked, casual tone, if I had any radio gear at home. He tried to make it sound like curiosity. His eyes didn't match his voice. I told him I have a receiver, hobby stuff. He nodded and said nothing else. Later, a different coworker told me federal guys had been in the dispatch office, not police, federal, asking about communications vulnerabilities, asking about who had access to what rooms, asking about where the backup generators were and what load they could handle. That is the point where a civilian ferry stops being just a ferry and becomes a piece of a larger system. I don't know if Canada will get pulled directly into fighting. Canada is already in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Canada is already tied to the United States through defense agreements. Canada is already tied to Denmark through alliance structures. There is no clean path here. But I know this. When the United States and other North Atlantic Treaty Organization members start pointing weapons at each other over Greenland, every country connected to the North Atlantic becomes a staging area, a listening post, a supply line, or a liability. That includes us. That includes you, if you live along these coasts. I want to tell you one more story from the air before I end this first part because it shows the kind of cruelty that comes early in wars between friends. I heard a Greenlandic local voice, scratched and faint, talking about a clinic needing oxygen bottles. Nothing political, just oxygen. Then a polished advisory voice came over it, louder, clean, telling people to disregard unauthorized transmissions and to await official guidance. That's not just censorship. That's a life and death priority shift. A clinic asking for oxygen is a real need. A polished voice trying to shut it down is power asserting control. If you take nothing else from what I'm saying, take this. When control becomes the main goal, human needs get treated as noise. Okay, I'm going to slow down and tell you where I am emotionally, because I don't want to sound brave. I'm not brave, I'm tense. I'm tired. I keep thinking I hear a car door outside and I flinch. I keep checking my window. I keep looking at my hands and noticing little cuts I got at work and thinking about how dumb it is that I'm worried about cuts while people up north might be sitting in the dark with no heat. I'm also angry. Not the shouting kind, the tight kind. I'm angry that people with power are treating Greenland as a prize and the rest of us as background. I'm angry that the air is full of scripts. I'm angry that a teacher in Nuke had to reach out to a stranger on a tiny blog to ask if her brother is alive in a practical sense. That's what war does. It breaks normal channels, then people build desperate, small channels to replace them. Now I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do next, and this is where the risk comes in for me. I'm going to keep listening, but I'm going to stop sharing anything that includes time patterns that could help somebody plan an intercept. I'm going to talk about human impact, about verification tricks, about what sounds pre-recorded, what sounds live, and what sounds coerced. I'm going to keep this channel alive in a different way now. I'm going to keep listening, but I'm going to stop sharing anything that includes time patterns that could help somebody plan an intercept. I'm going to talk about human impact, about verification tricks, about what sounds pre-recorded, what sounds live, and what sounds coerced. First decision, I moved. Not far, just enough to break the simple chain that connects my apartment, my gear, and the street outside. I packed the receiver, the laptop, the microphone, the car battery, a roll of Cokes, a handful of tools, and a notebook. I left the antenna wire where it was for a few hours on purpose, because if somebody was watching for movement, he would see nothing change immediately. I walked out with a grocery bag that looked normal, and I looked normal. I was tired enough to look normal. That helped. I went to the ferry terminal, not on shift, just a quiet visit. There's a maintenance space down there that nobody cares about unless a pump fails or a door sticks. Concrete, pipes, salt corrosion, the steady hum of things that keep moving. It's the kind of place where you can sit behind a stack of spare parts and listen without feeling exposed. I didn't transmit from there right away. I listened. I needed to know what the air was doing before I put my own voice back into it. Second decision, I started treating every polished message as suspicious until it proved itself. That sounds obvious, but it is hard to live with. Your brain wants a single clean story. Your brain wants one official voice to follow so you can sleep. That comfort becomes a weapon when a war grows under careful language. The cleanest messages are the easiest to fake and the easiest to mass distribute. The messy ones are harder to fake because mess has texture. Here's a practical verification trick that does not help anyone target anything. I'm saying this for ordinary people who still have access to any audio at all. Listen for local details that cannot be scripted by a distant office. A local announcer will mention a street name, a school closing, the smell of smoke, the exact way the wind is pushing snow against a door. A scripted advisory will avoid those details. It will tell you to remain calm and seek official channels. It will repeat phrases that sound designed to travel well across borders. Another trick. Listen for human correction. Live voices correct themselves. He will start a sentence, realize he said the wrong word, and fix it. A looped recording rarely has that. A deepfake sometimes tries to add it, but it tends to overdo it, or it places the stumble in the wrong spot, or the room tone stays too smooth through the stumble. Third decision. I stopped chasing drama. I started chasing consistency. I use 3 clocks now. My laptop. A cheap battery clock. A wristwatch. I kept them aligned when I could. I wrote down when my own gear drifted because drift happens, and you cannot accuse the world of lying if your own clock is sloppy. This matters later. I'm saying it because if you keep records that can survive skepticism. The war went open on the air before it went open on television. That is the truth that keeps repeating in my life right now. On a Wednesday night, close to midnight my time, I heard a line that was not a warning shot in language. It was a declaration with teeth. A voice with an American accent announced that a security zone was being enforced around critical infrastructure in Greenland. The voice did not say requested. The voice did not say coordinated. The voice said enforced. Within minutes, a Scandinavian accented voice cut in and called it unlawful. The Scandinavian voice said Allied vessels were being challenged in areas where Danish authority applied. The Scandinavian voice said shots had been fired. The Scandinavian voice said it would respond. That was the first time I heard a North Atlantic Treaty Organization voice talk to the United States with the tone you use for an enemy. The next thing that happened sounded small if you have never listened to military traffic. It sounded huge to me. The casual chatter vanished. The side comments vanished. The voices narrowed into short, rigid phrases. People stopped explaining themselves. Everyone sounded busy and tense. That is not a vibe. That is operations. That is the moment where somebody has a map open and he is moving real pieces. Then came the noise. Purposeful interference. Not constant, not everywhere. Targeted bursts, stepping on specific exchanges. It was done in a way that made me think the jammer knew what he was trying to cover. That tells you it is not random disruption. Somebody was shaping what could be heard and what could not. I heard a distress call from a civilian ship, and I'm leaving out every detail that could identify it. The ship reported a near miss from something moving fast, low, then a flash over the water. The voice on the ship sounded older, the sort of voice that has spent years at sea and rarely panics. This man was not panicking either. He was doing controlled fear. He asked for corridor guidance. He asked if anyone was coordinating. He got an answer from a calm official voice that ordered him to change course away from an area that, until that day, had not been publicly closed. The ship asked who had authority to order that. The calm voice replied with a phrase that made my jaw tighten. Authority is delegated. Delegated by who to who for what? That is the whole war in one sentence. That same night, I heard the first mention of an American destroyer operating north of Iceland and a Danish frigate shadowing it. I'm not naming hull numbers. I'm not telling you where exactly. What matters is the pattern. Allied ships were now treating each other as threats. Shadowing becomes warning. Warning becomes a shot. A shot becomes a hit. I also heard that aircraft names spoken in ways that made the hair on my arms lift. F-35, P-8, E-3. Those are not toys. Those are platforms built for contested airspace and wide area tracking. When you hear them paired with phrases about weapons release authority and hold fire and clear to engage, you are hearing war. Back home in St. John's, the first real catastrophe hit us in a stupid modern way. The internet went weird, not fully off, just wrong. Pages loaded halfway. Messages arrived late. Payment terminals failed for minutes at a time, then came back. People acted as if it was a routine outage. I watched the pattern, and I knew it smelled like a cut cable or a pressured backbone. Undersea cables get talked about in documentaries and policy papers, then people forget them again. They are physical. They can be cut, they can be bent, they can be sabotaged. When you fight over Greenland and the North Atlantic, cables become leverage. You don't even have to destroy them completely. You just have to make everyone doubt what still works. Doubt makes people obedient. Doubt also makes people violent. On Thursday afternoon, my bank app froze for 10 minutes. The grocery store down the street had a line because card payments were failing inside. The cashier looked embarrassed and angry. She kept saying, "Sorry, system's down." People kept shrugging. One guy started shouting that it was a conspiracy. Another woman told him to shut up because there were kids present. That was the first time I saw strangers turn on each other from this crisis. Here, on my street, over a machine refusing a payment. I went to the terminal early that evening and found a new rule posted with no signature. Staff were told to report personal radios, satellite phones, and unauthorized transmitters. There was no mention of hobby receivers, but the language was broad for a reason. Broad language lets someone pick targets later. I kept my face blank and did not argue. Arguing gets you remembered. Getting remembered becomes a problem when someone is collecting names. That night I did transmit again, short and careful, from a different spot. I didn't talk about movements, I talked about manipulation. I talked about loops. I talked about what it means when a message repeats with identical breath. I told people to distrust sudden all-clear statements that arrive while other channels still carry distress. Within 20 minutes, the same silencing pressure came back. A burst message, sharper this time, told me I was interfering with stabilization. The wording matched the earlier one too closely. It had the same rhythm, the same sentence length, the same dry tone. It was either the same person or a centralized script being used across multiple operators. I did not respond. Responding invites a conversation. Conversations become handles that people can grab. I kept talking for another 5 minutes, then I cut the transmitter and went back to listening. I need to say something here that is ugly. I realized I was being used even when I was careful. The simplest way to use a person like me is not to recruit him. It is to let him keep broadcasting, then track who responds, who listens, who moves after he speaks. Information creates motion. Motion creates targets. That thought kept me awake until my eyes burned. So I changed my posture again. I stopped inviting contact from unknown people. I kept a private email path open only for Avalu. Everyone else could listen without reaching in. That is harsh. But I'm not running a rescue net. I am one exhausted electrician trying not to get civilians killed by accident. The war escalated in Greenland in a way that the public news tried to wrap in soft paper. The next day, television showed a clip of officials smiling and saying de-escalation. The same day on the air, I heard a Greenlandic voice screaming at someone to stop firing near a fuel depot. Not a dramatic scream, a practical one. A person who knew exactly what happens when a fuel depot lights up near cold air and dry wind. A fuel depot is heat, power, transport, medical refrigeration, water pumps. Losing it is not symbolic. It is death by many small failures. I heard a second voice answer in English with a flat statement that the depot had been secured. That word again, secured. It is a tidy word that covers ugly behavior. A depot is secured when armed men control who gets fuel. Secured can also mean the fuel is burning and nobody can use it. Then I heard something even worse, a message warning, unauthorized civilian gatherings near a port in Greenland. Not a curfew announced by local government, a warning announced by an outside force. I thought of Ivalu and Nuuk, trying to teach kids while armed outsiders tell her not to gather. I thought of her brother in his village, waiting for power that might not come back. I wrote Ivalu and told her I was still listening. I did not ask for more detail. I just said I was there. She replied hours later with one line that hit me hard. The school is closed. Soldiers are in the airport. I did not know which soldiers. That is how information war works. Even the people living inside it cannot label it cleanly. She only knew armed men were present, rules were changing, and her students were scared. The next morning, St. John's changed again. The ferry schedule went from pending security to pending directive. That sounds minor. It isn't. Security implies a local concern, a temporary restriction. A plan. Directive implies someone higher has taken control and local staff are waiting for orders without question. That is when ordinary workers start getting turned into tools. A supervisor told us the ferry might be used for priority cargo. He used the phrase national interest. He also said we might be required to work longer shifts. Nobody asked for volunteers. It was framed as inevitable. People reacted in predictable ways. Some joked, some got loud and angry. Some went quiet and started thinking about their families. I did the quiet one. Quiet gets work done. Loud gets punished. At lunch, Aiden pulled me aside again. Aiden said 2 men in plain clothes had asked about me by name at the terminal gate. Aiden said he played dumb. Aiden said the men did not push hard. That was worse. I asked Aiden if he thought they were police. Aiden shook his head and said the men had the relaxed confidence of people who do not need to explain themselves. I went home that night and didn't go straight inside. I walked around the block. I checked parked cars. I checked for faces that turned away when I looked. I hated myself for doing it. I still did it. Inside my apartment, I found my door slightly out of alignment with the frame. Just a bit. It could have been swelling from damp air. It could have been my own bad memory. I have a good memory for wires and loads, not always for a door click. I checked my gear. Nothing missing. Nothing moved in a way I could prove. That didn't calm me. It made me feel trapped in uncertainty, which is the whole point of intimidation. So I made a realistic decision. I created a dead man folder. I hate that phrase, but it is the concept. I copied my recordings onto 2 separate storage drives. I labeled them by date. I printed out a simple index, paper, no secrets, just enough that someone could follow what was saved. I sealed 1 copy in a waterproof bag and I gave it to Mags with no explanation beyond, if I disappear, give this to someone you trust who won't sell it. Mags didn't ask questions. She looked at my face and understood the level. She hid it in her unit, somewhere among toys and spare blankets and the quiet order she keeps. That small act made me feel less alone. That same night, the air carried the first clear sign that Greenland's conflict had moved beyond posturing into exchange. A voice reported a surface contact damaged by a missile. Another voice argued it was a warning strike. A third voice said the warning strike had killed sailors. Nobody spoke the numbers. The voices stayed controlled. That does not change the reality. Then came the first piece of catastrophe that felt global. Satellite navigation interference. Pilots started reporting inconsistent position data. Ships reported heading discrepancies. That can happen in storms. It can happen in solar events. It can also happen when someone is deliberately messing with signals. I'm not giving you instructions on how to jam anything. I'm telling you what it does to normal life when it happens. Trucks miss exits. Ambulances lose route guidance. Fishing boats hesitate on return paths. Aircraft divert. Everything slows down. Slowdowns create scarcity. Scarcity creates fights. By Saturday, the grocery store near my building had an empty aisle where bottled water used to be. People were still polite in the morning. By afternoon, polite started cracking. A man tried to push in front of an older woman at the checkout and got shoved back. A cashier threatened to call the police. The man laughed and said police had better things to do. The cashier looked like she might cry, then she didn't. She just kept scanning items. That is what people do right before they break. They go numb. Mags asked me if she should close her daycare. She had parents who still needed to work. She also had kids who needed stability. She looked torn. I told her the honest thing. I said if the city starts rationing fuel and ferry operations become militarized, normal commute patterns will break. Parents will get trapped on the wrong side of water. Kids will get stranded. If she could keep a controlled, safe space open, it might become important. If she could not keep it safe, she should close before chaos forces her to close. Mags decided to keep it open with stricter rules. Only families she already knew. No walk-ins. She put a printed sign on the door with the rules, and she stood by them. That's how order survives for a while. While St. John's tense little life kept going, Greenland burned in the audio. Not literal fire everywhere, but conflict burning through systems. I heard a Greenlandic broadcast that sounded real, local, rushed. It warned of rolling outages. It warned of water pump failures. It told people to conserve heat. It told people to check on elders. It also asked people not to spread rumors about foreign evacuation. Minutes later, a polished all-clear message came through in English, claiming stability had been restored and urging people to ignore unauthorized channels. The all-clear arrived too soon. I knew it because in the same hour I heard distress traffic from a clinic. I heard a call for medevac that never got answered. I heard a municipal worker begging for diesel. That is when I started tracking something I had resisted tracking before. Authentication habits. Not codes that could be exploited, but human patterns that local operators repeat without thinking. A local announcer might always give weather first, even during crisis. A local municipal operator might always name the same officials in the same order. A fake broadcast gets those habits wrong. A fake broadcast also tends to be too clean in microphone quality, too centered in volume, too smooth. I went back on air that night and did one short segment focused only on this. The all-clear messaging was out of sync with reality, and people should rely on local imperfect updates, not foreign perfection. I avoided times, I avoided locations. I avoided telling anyone where to go. I just said the all-clear was lying. The response was immediate. My transmission got stepped on by noise within seconds. Then a burst came through over the noise. The burst did not say stop transmitting this time. It said something colder. It said, you are causing harm. That sentence did what the earlier threats did not. It hooked my conscience. It made me freeze. It made me ask myself if I really was causing harm by telling people not to trust an all clear. It was a psychological weapon and it worked for a moment. I stopped transmitting for 2 days after that, and during those 2 days I listened and watched what happened in my own town. Those 2 days taught me the difference between harm and discomfort. Truth causes discomfort. Lies cause harm. On the second day of silence, the port locked down fully. A fence line that had been symbolic became enforced. Trucks backed up. Drivers sat in cabs with engines off to save fuel. People started calling friends to ask if anyone had inside information. Inside information is a drug. It makes people feel special while the world collapses around them. Most inside information is wrong. That afternoon, we had a rolling blackout. Power went off in my building for 40 minutes. The elevator stopped. A couple of older residents got trapped on upper floors until neighbors helped. When the power came back, people applauded in the hallway. That applause sounded nervous and thin. The next blackout lasted longer. 2 hours. Phone service got spotty. Internet went down fully during the outage and did not recover immediately. I heard people in the hallway arguing about who had a generator, who had a battery pack, who had connections. The world becomes small during crisis. Your neighbors become your first government. Your building becomes your first border. That night, I turned my gear back on and heard a different kind of war signal. Internal North Atlantic Treaty Organization arguments leaking out. You could hear people trying to coordinate while not trusting each other. You could hear phrases about chain of command confusion. You could hear one voice demand confirmation from another voice, then refuse to accept it. Somebody asked if Article 5 applied. That question alone tells you the level. If you don't know what that means, I'll keep it simple. It is the clause that says, an attack on one is an attack on all. If North Atlantic Treaty Organization members are arguing whether it applies during conflict involving the United States, the alliance is cracking from the inside. I heard a British accented voice, tense, saying the priority was to keep the North Atlantic from becoming a general shooting gallery. I heard an American voice respond that Britain needed to choose a side. That is not alliance language. That is coercion. Then I heard something that felt like motive leaking out. A voice, American, mentioned continuity of strategic warning and hardening of northern assets. He spoke as if Greenland was not about people or politics, but about hardware that cannot be allowed to change hands. Strategic warning means early detection. Radar, space tracking, missile warning systems. The stuff that sits quietly until the day it matters, then it matters more than anything. If the United States believed those systems were at risk of falling under Danish, Greenlandic, or other North Atlantic Treaty Organization control that could restrict American use, the United States would see that as a threat. That is not moral, that is mechanical logic. Now add another motive. Minerals, rare earth extraction, supply chain control, green energy politics that still rely on messy mining. When global powers talk about clean futures, they still fight over dirty ground. Greenland is part of that ground. Now add cables, data, undersea routes. If you can pressure cables, you can pressure economies. If you can threaten to protect cables, you can demand obedience in return. That's the hidden conflict under the open one. The shooting is the surface. The real fight is control of infrastructure that shapes the next 50 years. I'm not defending anybody. I'm describing the logic so you can see the shape of it. Seeing the shape keeps you from getting hypnotized by slogans. On Monday, I got a message from a person who claimed to work in telecommunications in Greenland. I did not ask for proof. I did not engage in long conversation. The message was short and terrified. It said a data facility outside Nuuk had been taken by foreign forces and that local technicians were being ordered to keep it running while their families sat in the dark. I cannot verify that claim fully. I can tell you the claim fits the pattern. If you seize Greenland, you seize the nodes that carry information. You don't only seize runways and fuel, you seize the quiet buildings with cables and generators, because those buildings decide what the rest of the world knows. That night, the air delivered a catastrophe that moved from rumor to sound. An explosion near a coastal facility in Greenland. I did not hear the explosion itself. I heard the aftermath. Frantic calls for fire suppression assistance. Warnings about toxic smoke. A desperate request for breathing apparatus. Then silence. Silence is also a signal. Silence can mean the line got cut. Silence can mean the transmitter died. Silence can mean the person speaking is dead or running. Ivalu sent another message after midnight my time. She said there had been gunfire near the airport. She said no one knew which side fired first. She said people were sheltering in basements. She said the local government's voice sounded different and she didn't know if it was the same people speaking anymore. That last line matters. Information control does not only mean jamming, it means replacing voices. The easiest way to control a population is to keep the familiar voice, then change the content. People trust the voice because it used to be theirs. Tuesday, the United States went public with a narrative that sounded prepared weeks in advance. The message said American forces were acting to prevent hostile exploitation of Greenland's critical infrastructure and to protect civilians. The message also accused certain Allied elements of acting under foreign influence. That accusation is a grenade tossed into alliance space. Once you call an ally influenced by an outside enemy, you justify treating that ally as compromised. That opens the door to all actions. Denmark responded in anger and called the American action an occupation. Denmark demanded withdrawal. Denmark appealed to North Atlantic Treaty Organization mechanisms. North Atlantic Treaty Organization as an organization tried to speak in neutral language. That neutrality collapsed on the air within hours because neutrality becomes impossible when ships are exchanging fire. That night, I heard confirmation of a direct engagement between American forces and a Danish patrol near Greenland's west coast. Not a rumor. A calm voice reported damage and casualties. Another voice denied it, then later a third voice confirmed it again. The denials arrived too late. That pattern is common. Reality happens fast. Spin tries to catch up. In St. John's, the same night, police cruisers parked at intersections near the port. There were no sirens, just presence. Presence is how governments warn you without speaking. I made a decision that felt selfish and also responsible. I moved my main recordings out of my apartment completely. I took the second storage drive and I hid it in the ferry terminal in a place only electricians ever open. I won't describe it beyond that. It is a salt-stained metal space that needs a specific tool and a specific habit of mind to access. If I get grabbed, I want the record to survive me. That record matters now. Not because I think it will stop a war, but because the first casualty in wars between powerful friends is the shared story of what happened. Wednesday brought the event that turned this from regional horror into global crisis, at least for anyone paying attention to systems. One of the major undersea cable routes across the North Atlantic went down or degraded severely. I cannot tell you which one with certainty, and I am not going to guess. What I can tell you is that my internet went out for 6 hours straight, phone service became unreliable, and the city's information space turned into rumor soup. At the terminal, digital systems slowed. Scheduling screens lagged. Security badges failed for minutes. People got locked out of doors. People got trapped behind doors. That sounds funny until you realize that during crisis, a door that refuses to open can get someone killed. I watched a supervisor shout at a locked gate. The gate didn't care. The supervisor ended up begging a mechanic to bypass it manually. That's the shift. Authority turns into pleading when systems break. The people who can fix physical things gain power. I hate that. I also live in it. That afternoon, I saw the first real fight in the terminal parking lot. Two men argued over a gas can. One accused the other of hoarding. The other said he had kids. The first man punched him. The second man pulled a knife. People screamed. Security moved in and separated them. No one got killed. Everyone looked shaken. That is how a community starts to fail. Not with big speeches, but with a knife over fuel. I went back on air that night, longer this time, because the cable outage made it clear that normal channels were unreliable. I talked about the outage. I talked about preparing for communications gaps. I told people to pick a trusted local person, a real human, to check in with, because social media feeds would get flooded with fake all-clear messages and fake panic messages. My transmission held for 12 minutes before the jamming hit. The jamming this time did not feel random. It climbed in intensity right when I said fake all clear. Somebody hated that phrase. Somebody wanted that phrase gone. Then something new happened. A different voice came through over the noise. Not a threat, not a script. A human voice, strained, whispering fast. The voice spoke my name again and said, "Stop broadcasting. The suppression teams are triangulating you." Triangulating means locating a transmitter by direction finding. That is a real thing. It is not magic. It is not instant in all conditions, but it is real enough to be deadly. That warning felt different than the earlier threats. The earlier threats were about obedience. This warning was about survival. I cut transmission immediately. I didn't finish my sentence. I didn't sign off. I just stopped. My hands were shaking badly enough that I had to sit on them for a minute to keep them still. I listened after that and caught a short exchange that confirmed the warning. A voice complained about unauthorized transmitters and mentioned collection. Another voice answered with a calm instruction to clear the interference. They weren't talking about radio interference only. They were talking about me and people like me. I did not go back to my apartment that night. I slept on a cot in the ferry terminal maintenance area, boots on because I didn't trust what waiting at home might bring. At 3 a.m, I woke to a sound that didn't belong in the terminal. A heavy knock. Distant. Then voices echoing down the corridor. I stayed still and listened. The voices sounded official. They were asking for access to certain rooms. They were not shouting. That made it worse. Calm voices doing intrusive things are always worse than loud ones. I heard my supervisor's voice answer them. I heard keys. I heard doors. I heard footsteps. They did not come to the maintenance room I was in. Either they didn't know, or they didn't care yet. That yet was all I could think about. When morning came, I walked out into cold air that smelled metallic. The city looked normal from a distance. Up close, people moved faster. Cars had full trunks. There were more police around the port. The coffee shop near my building was open, but the owner had a handwritten sign saying cash only. I called Mags from a payphone because my phone was acting weird and I didn't trust it. Payphones still exist in a few corners here. Mags answered and sounded exhausted. She said 2 parents hadn't shown up for pickup the night before because roads were blocked near the port. She said she had kept the kids overnight, fed them cereal, and called the parents until she got through. She said everyone was scared but trying to act normal for the kids. I told Mags to keep the door locked and not to open for strangers. She told me she didn't need the advice. That made me smile for half a second, then it went away. While local life tightened, Greenland crossed a threshold. I heard it in 2 transmissions that landed close together. The first was a Greenlandic municipal voice, weak and tired, asking for anyone with diesel to report to a pumping station because water pressure was failing in a neighborhood. The second was an American accented voice announcing kinetic operations were underway to neutralize hostile elements near critical sites. Kinetic operations means shooting, drones, explosives, direct action. It is a term used to keep blood out of sentences. I heard a Danish accented voice reply with anger, warning that any unilateral kinetic operation in Greenland without Danish authorization would be treated as hostile action. The reply came back with a phrase that sounded rehearsed again. Authorization is obsolete. That is the moment the alliance died, at least in practice. If authorization is obsolete, then treaties are paper and the strongest actor sets the rules. That night I received the burst transmission I'd been dreading since the first week. It came through scratchy, broken, carried on a path that kept fading. So I had to lean close and replay parts. It was a Greenland station. Damaged, not a polished voice. The person speaking sounded young, breathless, fighting to keep a signal alive. He said the power plant near a coastal facility had been hit. He said the port was closed. He said foreign troops were controlling access to fuel. He said local police had been ordered to stand down. He said people were moving inland on foot because vehicles had no fuel and roads were blocked by checkpoints. Then he said a line that felt aimed straight at my chest. He said, "Bren Algren, if you are hearing this, stop saving us. Save the truth. They are using your archive." Right after he said my name, the transmission cut. Not a fade, not a clean sign-off, just gone. I sat there staring at the waveform on my laptop, feeling sick. Using my archive. That confirmed the fear I had been trying to keep under control. My recordings, even the careful ones, were being used by someone for purposes I did not choose. Maybe to identify authentic local voices to suppress. Maybe to map who was still transmitting. Maybe to build convincing fakes. Maybe to track civilian movement through reaction patterns. 5 minutes after the Greenland station died, the polished North Atlantic Treaty Organization all-clear message came on again. It claimed stability had been restored. It claimed humanitarian corridors were open. It told people to remain calm and await guidance. It was too early. It was too clean. It was also dangerous, because people hearing corridors would move. Movement gets people killed when corridors are lies. I made a decision in that moment that put me at real risk. I went back on air for the first time in days, and I spoke directly against the all-clear. I did not use times. I did not use directions. I did not say where corridors were claimed to be. I simply said this. A damaged Greenland station had just reported critical failures and coercion, and any all-clear message that denies that reality is not safe to follow. I kept my voice calm, because panic is contagious. I kept it human, because scripts hate human. I kept it short because staying on air too long invites the triangulation problem. The jamming hit immediately, stronger than ever. It wasn't just noise, it sounded like layered signals designed to chew up speech. I heard my own voice break up into nonsense. I heard my words get swallowed. Then, through the mess, I heard something else, a command voice ordering someone to locate and neutralize. It was not aimed at Greenland. It was aimed at the interference source. It was aimed at me. I cut the transmitter. I grabbed the laptop. I grabbed the receiver. I grabbed the battery. I left cables behind. I moved fast through maintenance corridors, keeping my head down, heart slamming, trying not to make the kind of noise that makes people look. I hid in a space under a stairwell for 20 minutes, listening for footsteps. I heard none close. That didn't reassure me. It told me something worse. Whoever was looking might be using systems, not boots, cameras, badge logs, gate records. I made another hard decision. I stopped trying to transmit from fixed locations in the city. Fixed locations are predictable. Predictable gets you caught. I did the only thing I could do that made sense with my life and skills. I got on the ferry, not as a passenger, as crew. The ferry was scheduled for a run that had been delayed and reshaped by directive. Priority cargo was being loaded under security oversight. Containers I had never seen before, sealed, guarded by men who did not talk to us. The men carried rifles and moved with training. They were not local police. They were not our usual security. I kept my mouth shut and did my work. Electricity does not care about geopolitics. A relay still fails. A pump still needs power. A battery still needs charge. During loading, I saw one of the armed men glance at my hands, then at my tool belt. His eyes lingered a fraction longer than comfortable. That was a quiet warning. He was assessing whether I was useful or dangerous. We pulled away from the dock under gray sky. The harbor looked calm. The calm was fake. Calm is what a city looks like right before constraints become rules. Once we were underway, I went down into a service compartment near the electrical panels. Steel walls, vibration, the smell of oil, and warm insulation. It was loud enough that my small setup would be masked. It was also shielded enough that any signal I pushed would not travel far, which meant I could do something safer, record my own narration for later transmission if I found a safe window, or if someone else survived me and wanted the record. Halfway through the crossing, the captain made an announcement to crew only. He said we might be diverted again. He said we might be boarded at the destination. He said no one was to speak to media. He said the word protocol more than once. There it was again. Stabilization, protocol, corridor. Delegated authority. These are the words that cover violence with paperwork. Then the sea itself delivered a piece of war to our senses. In the far distance, above the horizon line, there was a streak of light that moved too fast to be a civilian aircraft. It was not close enough to hear, but it was close enough to see. Another streak followed, then a faint flash. People on deck pretended not to notice. Pretending becomes habit when you cannot handle what noticing would mean. Down in the compartment, I listened again. The air traffic was chaotic. Not constant panic, but dense, layered. Short calls, redirects, warnings about restricted airspace, reports of unknown tracks. I heard a phrase that chilled me. Blue on blue risk. That means friendly forces might hit each other by mistake. In an alliance fracture, blue on blue becomes normal because friendly becomes unclear. Later that night, the ship's internet link failed fully. The captain's satellite phone kept dropping. A crew member tried to call his wife and couldn't. You could feel the mood shift without anyone speaking. Isolation makes people desperate. We arrived in Halifax under a different kind of darkness. Not night darkness, controlled darkness. Parts of the port were lit hard. White floodlights. Other parts were dim. Security vehicles moved in tight patterns. There were military police present, and there were uniformed people I couldn't place. We were boarded before we even fully tied up. A team came on with authority and did not ask permission. They checked cargo seals. They checked crew IDs. They asked the captain questions in a tone that implied the answers were already known. One of them asked if anyone on crew had broadcast capability. The captain glanced down the line and said no. I kept my face blank. My heart was punching my ribs. They didn't search every bag. That was interesting. They were looking for specific things, not general contraband. That means they had a model of what they wanted, shaped by intelligence. That model probably included people like me. After boarding, we were held in place for hours, not arrested, just held. You can hold a whole ship without calling it detention if you use the right language. I sat in a crew lounge with stale coffee and watched other crew members scroll dead phones. A man I barely knew started talking about his cousin in the Canadian Forces and how the cousin said American troops had requested access to certain facilities in Labrador. Another crew member said he heard Goose Bay was being used as a staging hub. I cut the gossip gently. I told them to stop speaking details in a public space, not because I wanted to control them, but because I could feel ears around us. A room full of tired workers becomes a goldmine for an intelligence officer. People leak without meaning to. Later, I got pulled aside by a man in plain clothes who knew my name. He did not introduce himself. He walked me to a corner of the terminal where cameras still existed, but sound didn't travel well. He spoke quietly. He said he knew I had been transmitting. He said he knew I had been recording. He said he didn't care about the hobby. He cared about operational interference. He offered me a deal without calling it a deal. He said if I handed over my recordings, I would be left alone. He said if I kept broadcasting, I would be treated as a threat. He said threats could be handled in ways I would not enjoy. I looked him in the eye and did something that surprised me. I told him I was a ferry electrician and I had no interest in being part of anyone's operation. I told him I wasn't handing over anything. I told him the moment governments start confiscating civilian recordings during a war between allies, the truth dies. The man didn't get angry. He nodded slowly and said, I was being dramatic. He said history would be written by people with access to facts, not by amateurs. That word amateurs hit me harder than it should have. It was contempt, pure. I told him he could call me anything he wanted, but I wasn't helping him bury civilian voices in Greenland. I told him a teacher had begged me for confirmation her brother had power, and his side's all-clear messages were lies. His expression changed for the first time. Not guilt, calculation. He asked me the teacher's name. I refused to answer. He told me I was making myself a problem. Then he walked away. That encounter confirmed the worst motive. This wasn't only about ships and jets, it was about controlling the narrative so completely that even a tiny civilian recording archive threatened someone. I went back to the ship and made a decision that could ruin my life but felt necessary. I split my archive again. I left one small subset of recordings in a place where I knew it would be found if the ship got searched later. That subset contained only public-facing content and my own commentary. No sensitive patterns, no raw logs. It was bait, and I hated myself for thinking in that way, but I needed them to take something and feel satisfied. The full archive stayed with me, hidden tight, wrapped, sealed, carried in a way that looked boring and ordinary. The most dangerous things always look boring. When we were finally released, we were not allowed to return directly to St. John's. The ferry was redirected again, ordered to carry cargo to a different port, then return later. Nobody told us why. That was the pattern now. Workers moved, questions discouraged. While we waited for the next directive, I did something I should have done earlier. I recorded a clean summary of what I knew, in my own voice, with no tactical detail. I recorded it for two audiences, people listening in the moment and the future, if the moment went dark. That is what you do when you suspect you might not survive the week. You build a message that can outlive you. Back on the air, Greenland got worse. Nuke went into deeper outage cycles. Reports came through about frozen pipes in apartment blocks because building heat failed. That is deadly in Greenland. Simple and fast. People can survive gunfire by hiding. People cannot hide from cold when a city's systems fail. The conflict also spilled into internal Greenland politics. I started hearing local voices accusing other local voices of collaborating. That is how communities fracture under occupation pressure. Some people cooperate to keep water running. Others call it betrayal. Both sides believe they are saving lives. Both sides end up hating each other. Then came the first confirmed refugee movement, boats leaving Greenland's southwest coast, small craft, overloaded, trying to reach safer points. Some aimed for Iceland, some aimed for smaller settlements, some aimed for nothing. Just movement away from gunfire and toward any rumor of stability. Over the air, I heard one of these boats call for help in rough conditions. The boat was not military. It was a human voice, begging for guidance. He said children were on board. He said he couldn't see well. He said the engine was failing. A calm official voice answered and ordered him to stop and await boarding. The man on the boat begged again. He said stopping meant drifting into ice. The calm voice repeated the order. Then the channel got stepped on by noise and the boat voice vanished. I don't know if they were rescued. I don't know if they drowned. I know that the system treated them as an object to control, not a family to save. That's the hidden motive inside the open war too. Control beats mercy when leaders fear losing a strategic node. At this point, Canada started cracking in public. Provinces demanded clarity. People demanded why Canadian ports were being used for American operations. American officials spoke as if Canadian compliance was assumed. Danish officials spoke as if Canada was betraying allies. Canada tried to speak in the middle. Middle ground becomes a target. In Halifax, I heard a rumor in the terminal that a protest had formed outside a federal building. People demanded Canada stay neutral. Other people demanded Canada support Denmark and Greenlandic sovereignty. Another group demanded Canada support the United States because security. Police lines formed. Somebody threw something. The crowd surged. The rumor said there were injuries. Rumor again. I did not see it with my own eyes. I'm telling you because the pressure inside society was rising, and pressure finds outlets. The next catastrophe hit where people feel it deepest. Medicine, deliveries delayed. Refrigerated supplies compromised during outages. Pharmacies rationing. In St. John's, my neighbor downstairs needed insulin. He had enough for 2 weeks. He asked me if I thought deliveries would keep coming. I told him I didn't know. I helped him find a cooler and ice packs. I hated that this was the level our lives had reached, improvising healthcare logistics in an apartment hallway. That night, Ivalu sent a message that broke me for a while. She said her brother's village had gone silent. No transmitter, no local updates. She said she couldn't reach him. She said rumors claimed foreign troops had secured the generator site in the village. She said other rumors claimed the generator had burned. She didn't know which rumor to believe. She begged me to tell her which was true. I listened all night for the village name. I heard nothing. No mention. No confirmation. That doesn't mean he died. It means the channel went dark. People survive in darkness. People also die in darkness. I could not lie to her. I wrote her back and said I had no confirmation. I said if she got any local voice she trusted, she should prioritize that voice, not my distant listening. I told her to conserve heat and power. I told her to keep kids close. I told her to keep a paper list of emergency contacts because digital lists vanish in outages. She replied with one line, "Paper feels safer than flags now." That line made me realize something else. For civilians, flags mean nothing when armed men speak in polished English over local emergency channels. Paper lists and warm rooms mean everything. The final shift toward open war happened in a single day, with 3 events that tied together. First, a major North Atlantic Treaty Organization meeting failed publicly. Leaks came out that the United States would not accept any restriction on American operations in Greenland. Second, Denmark announced it would deploy additional forces to protect Greenlandic civil infrastructure, with Greenlandic consent. Third, an American voice announced any foreign troop movement into designated security zones would be treated as hostile. That triangle creates inevitability. You cannot deploy into a zone that another power claims it will shoot you for entering without expecting shooting. The shooting came, and it came fast. Over the air, I heard an engagement involving aircraft and a coastal site. The details were fragmented. A report of a drone being shot down. A report of a radar site being damaged. A report of casualties. A report of fire at a fuel storage area. A report of civilians trapped between a checkpoint and a closed road. Then I heard a different kind of message, one that chilled me because it sounded like the beginning of the general war behavior. A voice announced restrictions on all transmissions in a broad area and threatened enforcement. That is information martial law. That is a step that regimes take when they want control more than truth. I listened for any authentic local Greenland voice after that. I caught a few scraps, faint and brief. People whispering into transmitters. A municipal worker reporting a fire and begging for water pressure. A nurse asking for antibiotics. A father asking if any boat was still running between settlements. The scraps ended one by one. Then the polished, all-clear message came back again, louder than everything else. It claimed humanitarian stability. It claimed corridors. It claimed the situation was under control. I wanted to smash my laptop, not from rage, from helplessness. That all clear was not only a lie, it was a weapon designed to move civilians into predictable patterns. So I did the only thing left that felt honest and safer than broadcasting details. I recorded this narrative. This exact thing you are hearing now, I recorded it in segments, because I might need to transmit it in pieces in short windows if I get chased. I recorded it, so if I die, someone can play it. I also sent one last message to Mags. I told her to keep the archive safe. I told her if anyone official asks for it, she should say she knows nothing. I told her to protect the kids first. Mags replied short and sharp, "I protect kids. You protect truth. Do not be stupid." That made me laugh once. Then it made me want to cry, and I didn't do either for long because the ferry's generator room needed attention and real life keeps dragging you back. Here is the last major catastrophe I can confirm from both my listening and my local reality. The North Atlantic communication backbone fractured. Not one clean cut, multiple failures, some accidental, some deliberate. You could see it in the way official messages became inconsistent across regions. You could see it in the way rumors outran confirmations. You could see it in the way local authorities stopped trying to correct misinformation because they couldn't keep up. That kind of fracture creates a second war on top of the first. Communities begin fighting ghosts. Neighbors accuse neighbors of spying. People attack supply trucks because they believe a rumor the truck is carrying weapons. People refuse evacuation because they believe an all clear. People run into danger because they believe a corridor. I'm telling you this with my whole chest. Treat every message that promises safety as suspicious until you have local confirmation from someone you trust. Not an account, not a video. A human you can reach directly. Now I need to close this out because I can't keep doing long transmissions. You heard what happens. I get jammed. I get threatened. I get tracked. My job also keeps dragging me into spaces where I cannot safely talk. Here is where things stand at the end of my record, at least from my seat in this mess. Greenland has become a contested zone where the United States is acting unilaterally. Denmark is resisting with political and military pressure. North Atlantic Treaty Organization cohesion is broken, and civilians in Greenland are trapped under information control and infrastructure failure. Canada is being pulled into logistics whether Canada wants it or not, and Canadian ports and bases are becoming chess squares. Newfoundland is feeling it through rationing, blackouts, port restrictions, and creeping fear that turns neighbors into strangers. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if the United States backs down. I don't know if Denmark escalates to a point that forces other allies to choose sides. I don't know if Greenland's local government survives intact or gets replaced in practice by whoever holds fuel and runways. I don't know if Ivalu's brother is alive in that village. That uncertainty is the worst part. I do know what I'm going to do. I'm going to stop live transmitting for now. I'm going to keep listening and saving. I'm going to share only when I can do it safely, in short bursts with no operational patterns, no location hints, no details that help violence. I'm going to keep this record alive because someone out there will try to rewrite this war into something clean and heroic. It isn't. It is coercion, fear, cold systems failing, and ordinary people trying to keep kids warm. If you are hearing this, and you are in a place where things still work, do boring preparation, water, heat, cash, a plan for phone charging, a plan for checking on neighbors without getting pulled into rumor hysteria. If you are in a place where things are already failing, pick one trusted person and coordinate small, local, real actions. Share food, share heat, share paper lists. Avoid crowds when tension rises. Crowds are where fear turns into violence. I'm going to end with something that feels personal because it is. The Greenland station that called my name told me to stop saving them and save the truth. That is not a heroic mission. It is a grim one. Truth doesn't feed anyone. Truth doesn't warm anyone. Truth does one thing: it keeps the future from being a lie.